All right, well, welcome to StraitData podcast. I have to apologize up front because I'm running a second computer, and this computer is not, very nice, and its fan is wailing away in the background. So, hopefully it's not too noticeable, not too annoying, the sound quality here. If you hear that buzz in the back or whatever it may be. But today I want to introduce yet another new topic that I haven't brought up before. Although it might be slightly related to the coronavirus, I've tried to refrain from just venting about the virus because, even though I spent a lot of time talking about the economic impact and mostly about the bailout, stimulus, spending bill, whatever you want to call it, I really don't have that much to say about the virus itself. There is some data that's starting to become a lot more readily available. I'm personally looking at it. I'm not a doctor though, and I'm not very experienced in analyzing that kind of data. I think I get the gist of some of the main. Sorry, I'm going to move the mic. Hopefully, this isn't super annoying here. I'm just going to adjust things. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with this type of data. I think I get the general premises of the curve and the spread of the disease and the case counts and therefore, translating into death counts and rates. But, I've refrained from talking about that a ton. But today what I want to talk about is public transit ridership, which is my personal speciality, so to speak. I have a civil engineering background, and when I did civil engineering, I focused in transportation engineering, and that's where we look at traffic, roadway design, geometric design, but also all sorts of traffic studies and analysis of traffic data. But one realm of transportation, transportation is public transit. And it's not a huge aspect of transportation because, not that many people use public transit. But in some of our biggest cities where most of our people are, public transit is a normal part of life. And, there are tens of billions of dollars that go towards public transit as far as funding every year. So, it's nothing like the roadway funding and the private vehicle, private automobile industry, so to speak. It's not that big of a scale, but it's an interesting topic for a lot of people. I always say that the amount of attention and press and the amount of people that study and write about and blog about public transit does not accurately reflect the public. Well, that's a bad word to say because the society. It does not accurately reflect the society's desire to use, and spending on public transit. So, a lot of people like to talk public transit, but, a lot of times we just talk about it because it's kind of like, it's exciting even though it's not actually a big part of society. And like I said, it is a big part of society in some major cities, and I wouldn't say big part of society. It's a noticeable part of society in a lot of big cities. But you pan back and you look at all of travel and how people actually get around across the country, and it's not that large. But people that are in the urban realm and urban planning realm do like to talk about transit, and everyone has opinions and views on transit. But I am a very, like I've said before, I'm a very objective person. I am not going to ever sit here and say that, there should be more public transit funding or, we should get rid of public transit. It's stupid that we're what is the word? Subsidizing, all this waste. Well, I might talk about my opinions on that at a future time or in a separate podcast, but my views, my personal views on public transit are completely separate than my analytical views of public transit. I've been studying public transit trends for a long time now, a few years back in my college days, and I've really developed an understanding of the trends, I think, and I just love looking at the numbers. I don't like commenting on my ideas about it and my personal beliefs about the morality or whatever my how I think society should be or ought to be. What I really do is I look at the numbers of ridership and service provided and all the data that I can get from the sources from which I get the data, and I just comment on those trends and what those may mean. I may make some predictions and basically say why the trends are doing what they're doing. So hopefully that's a little bit of a primer for what we're going to do today. I want to go over the source of my data. Pretty much all of my data is coming from the National Transit Database, which is run as part of the Federal Transit Administration through United States Department of Transportation. Okay, so you have, let's say, President Trump, and he's got his cabinet. Okay, one of the major departments of the U.S. government is the United States Department of Transportation. It's one of the secretaries on his cabinet, the Secretary of Transportation. Okay, so the U.S. DOT has inside of it has all sorts of different programs. Sea travel, air travel, highway travel, and transit is one of its administrations, the Federal Transit Administration. And then under the Federal Transit Administration, they have this effort to collect data from all the public transit providers in the country that are operated at the local level. So all your local buses from most cities, unless your city is like a little town kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it might be operated a little bit funky, and they just don't need the funding that FTA provides, then they don't have to comply. If they don't want the funding that FTA has to offer, then they might not want to report to FTA. So they might not report. Some small agencies in the middle of nowhere may not report. But most agencies in decent sized cities, all over the country, from major metro areas down to, just rinky-dink towns that have, a bus system, at least a few buses running, right? They report their data to NTD, and they report it to the Federal Transit Administration that collects it in this database. And, in turn, the FTA hands out grants, so if you comply with all their reporting rules, then they'll give you a few dollars here and there. And if you have big needs, they give you a lot more money. And so like big agencies, I mean, they get billions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars at least from the maybe not billions. Well, I don't know, New York City. But yeah, definitely millions of dollars are handed out to all these agencies, to buy buses and capital matches, things of that nature. And part of getting those funds, you have to comply with these reporting standards. So public transit agencies are required to track, the number of people that ride their buses and their rail. I mean, there's all different types of modes. Even demand response transit, which is usually used for older or handicapped people, and it's done on a demand response. It's done in demand response, which means that there's no fixed route, that a bus or a rail vehicle is driving along. The person that wants to use the service just calls the transit authority or the whoever's the provider, and that provider sends out like a van or a larger vehicle or a very small bus or whatever it is. Sometimes they're small vehicles, but single use vehicles, and they go and pick that person up and bring them to where they need to be, door-to-door service, kind of like Uber, I guess you could say, except they've been doing this for a long time before Uber, right? But you had to call ahead. I mean, those are called demand response, but those are operated by transit agencies, and they even track that data. So you have buses, you have rail, you have ferry, public transit, passenger ferries basically, and you've got all sorts of weird modes that kind of we push to the wayside because they don't make up very much of the total. But for the most part, you have your heavy rail and your commuter rails and your buses, and now you've got some bus rapid transit and some other modes. We can get out into the wacky modes, but I really want to focus on the major ones. But that's kind of the system of reporting. These agencies have to track how many people ride. They have to track how many miles that the vehicles travel while they're in service, while they're accepting passengers, and the hours they clock, and some other data that I may forget to describe it. They have to track like VOMS, which is VOMS, vehicles operating at maximum service. So there's all these terms that I might skip over, and you might just have to catch up later or look them up. I don't know. But all this data is reported, and a lot of it I process. So when I talk about BPRM, like boardings per revenue mile, NTD doesn't report that directly, but they report boardings, which is, unlinked passenger trips, and they report vehicle revenue miles. So I created a term called BPRM to track, boardings per, vehicle revenue mile. So all these trends, I took the data, I took the few fields that they report monthly and in some cases only annually, and I process it, and these are the results. So I want to do this once a month because this is just my passion. I mean, I love transit data, and I love keeping tabs on it every single time they release. I mean, within the couple days, I look at it, I upload the new data, and I put it into my tracker. And I look at all the trends, and it's just really exciting. It was a few months ago. Well, I'd say probably 6 months ago, or probably even more than that. Honestly, I'm not exactly sure, but around 6 months ago to 9 months ago, I was looking at these trends, and I started to notice. You see the trends. You see them start to move a certain way, and you think, oh, maybe they're changing a little bit. Maybe we're set for some actual trend here, rather than what I thought. Maybe just be data noise. The numbers go up and down every month. You start to see a few months in a row, or just a general trend over many months. And you're like, wow, that could be something. So, if you didn't know, from 2014, about somewhere around October 2014. The United States in general had started a period of declining transit ridership across the country. There wasn't like a few states that were bad and a few states that were good, and the bad was just outweighing the good. I mean, it was across the country. There were very, very few places in the country where transit ridership was growing. And I've done studies. I've published papers on looking into the demographic trends across the nation that have been contributing to that, and the economic trends that have been contributing to that, even the Uber and Lyft movement, that have been contributing to that. But somewhere around 2014, we went from growing transit ridership to declining transit ridership, and a lot of people, were threatened by that, whether it be environmentalists or just public transit advocates in general. I mean, lots of people just like the idea of public transit. Urban planners, people felt threatened and really scared that this trend would continue for a long time, because at that point we were having growing population, obviously, but also growing employment. I mean, employment was growing really fast. Through 2014, 15, 16, 17, and the trend just kept going. The transit ridership just kept falling. And we started to look at the underlying trends, and you notice that coming out of a time where the economy was not as great, people were starting to buy cars, and private automobile ownership was going up very quickly, and household vehicle accessibility and ownership was rising, rapidly, because people that had jobs actually could start affording cars now. So although employment was going up, so you thought, okay, well, more people need, transit's a great mode to get to work, so it's going to help. No, and it was a counter. It was the opposite. It was people had jobs so they could afford cars, and then they they were using the cars instead of they needed to use the bus before they had the car to get to work. So transit ridership had been declining all the way through. I mean, we're talking 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. And then in the middle of the year last year, somewhere around the middle of 2019, I started to recognize, this trend is starting to flatten a little bit. This curve that's been going down for so long, it was accelerating like in 2016, 2017. It was only getting worse and worse. But, in 2018, it was like, okay, it's leveled off, but it's still going down, straight down. And then in 2019, things started to change. And I noticed it, and I said, I just kind of like looked at the forecast, and I looked at, the trend, and I thought, in the next year, in the next 12 months, we might trough. We might actually trough, because we had been talking about it for 4 or 5 years at that point of declining ridership. It was pretty significant to me that, it happened pretty rapidly. I mean, some people were pointing it out. I was looking around, but it happened pretty quick. Around middle last year, if you had said in the next 9 months that transit ridership is going to trough, that we're going to hit the lowest point, and we're actually going to start increasing in ridership again after, for the first time in years. I mean, some people would have thought you're crazy, because it had just been a precedent that ridership was going down, and because the economy was still doing so well, it was just assumed that vehicle ownership was just going to keep growing and growing. But, some people, you look at the business cycle, you looked at some of the macroeconomic trends, you could have said, well, we might have a slowing economy and people might start defaulting on cars. But I think the employment, at a certain point, people can only have so many cars, and then employment for everyone else just keeps going, and there's so many people that just have jobs that, they don't even want to use a car. But yeah, I noticed this trend, and I predicted it. I called it out. I didn't put it on blast. I really hoped that I had started this podcast before, back then, because I was calling this, that this trend would realize grow, a trough in the ridership a few months ago. I mean, back in fall, in autumn of last year. And I was telling my buddy, a lot of people don't really even care about this kind of stuff. So, it's not huge news to anybody besides me, for the most part, and a few other bloggers. But it would have been really cool to have put that out on blast, to have that out there. And now I just basically need everyone to take my word for it. And, but the trend is pretty obvious. I mean, anyone who was looking at this trend probably should have seen that something was cooking. It was just kind of hard to believe at that time, that trend would keep up and it would go all the way down to zero. The decline would go all the way to zero, and we would actually start going positive. But, I did, and there's one person out there that I know who really knows, he knows that I called it because I had told him. And right at the end of the year, there started to be some articles out about, hey, 2019 actually wasn't that bad of a year. Things are starting to look up, especially the last couple months of 2019. I mean, it started to get really good. And we realized it because, the data lags. Right now, we just had February data drop. And I tend not to look at the most recent month of data that drops, because a lot of times the vehicle revenue mile and vehicle revenue hour reporting is it's really bad in the month of. The ridership data is usually pretty accurate, but a lot of times there's agencies that just don't report the revenue miles and revenue hours for the most recent month, and that skews your understanding of boardings per revenue hour if you sum up for the whole country. And there's some agencies that are just reporting zeros, they're blanks. So they're reporting ridership, but not vehicle revenue miles. So it throws things off. So I tend not to look at the, I tend to be careful. I tend to look 1 month behind, and it's already 1 month behind, because it's already April and they just released February. And I'm looking at January, for all the metrics to be accurate. And, I noticed that it took some time for December to even, December wasn't even that great. They're even a couple months behind on one specific metric called VOMs, and I'm still not quite sure if they're caught up to that in December of 2019, because it doesn't look great. But all that to say, I had predicted this troughing of the ridership trend, and this most recent month of data, this January 2020 data, has proved that in flying colors. I mean, the turnaround has been so fast. I guess I'll report on January and then February because, January was the most impressive month. I mean, I don't even know how this happened. I'm kind of shocked just looking at the numbers. December actually showed signs. It flashed signs. December looked like, I was looking at December last month and it was like, it's positive. It's actually the 12-month rolling average, not just the month of December, but you average the previous 12 months and compare it to the 12 months before that, was actually positive, in December of 2019. But it was just barely. I mean, it was by less than 1/10%, basically. It was like 1/10% positive. So it's nothing you could hang your hat on. But the trend was, I had called it basically. But January 2020, it just blew everything out of the water. And I kind of went back and looked, and I said, I don't know if it was more work days. I haven't really counted that yet, but I said, maybe it's because winter of 2019 was just really bad. But then I compared it to 2018, and it was still really good. So let me give you the numbers for ridership. I'm going to go through, I got a lot of stuff to go through. All right. So January 2019 was up 4.4%. I'm sorry. January 2020 was up 4.4% over January 2019. And the 12-month rolling average, I just told you in December, the 12-month rolling average from the previous 12 months was plus 0.1%. Now, just to have just to have everyone who's listening know, the percent changes in ridership are a small change is a huge deal to a lot of analysts. I mean, especially when you're looking at a nationwide figure. The ridership going down at 1.2% per year in the previous few years was major. I mean, it was heartbreaking to people, and it was just like a 1% decline. So, when you've got what we've got, the 4.4% jump, that is huge. The last 12 months, that's 12 months, that's basically February through January, February 18 through January 19 as the base, and then February 2019 to January 2020 as the current. That percent change was 0.7% positive. So we have officially resurrected from all the years of ridership decline. In December, it was technical, but in January, it was made certain that we had we had basically risen from the ashes. And it didn't take that long. The signs really started to become evident, like I said, in mid-2019. And here we are by January 2020, and we're starting to look fabulous. I mean, we're starting to look fantastic. We're starting to look like we're about to hit the jackpot here. I mean, all the transit lovers should be throwing a party. And then the coronavirus hit. And yes, we do have ridership data for February 2020. And although the rolling 12-month average was still positive, I think it was let me see here. I thought it was still I think it was even higher. Is that possible? Even though that's not possible. The 2020 February from 2019 February was down 1.7%. So amidst this growing, this increasing trend, I just have to change something here because I want to look at, I'm looking at the data live here. I've got some stuff written down, but as I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about some things. But despite this growing trend, ridership went down 1.7 February to February. And that is concerning. And that's obviously coronavirus related. Because what happened, in February is a lot of people were already starting to, get a little skittish. You had Seattle, who got hit pretty early. I don't know. I think they had first cases at the end of February. I'm not sure. But, you had California and Washington State getting hit hard. I think in February. Not hit hard, but just people were starting to freak out. And people were starting to work from home. And I don't know. There were probably some winter storms, but here's the really interesting thing. We had an extra day in February. So, 1/28, right? I mean, that's what you should have. That's the benefit that you should have. You have a percent. What's that in percent terms? It's 3.6%. Just in number of days. You have 3.6 more days in February 2020 than you did in February 2019 because of the leap year. But you're still down 1.7% in ridership. So that's super alarming. Now, the number of work days actually stayed the same. The number of weekdays, Monday through Friday, was 20 in both February 2019 and February 2020. So, there's a little bit of redemption there, but still, one more day, a full day of ridership, and you couldn't even come out positive. In fact, you were down 1.7 despite the growing trend. So I'm getting here 0.8% rolling 12-month change, but I don't think that's possible if the current month was down. So I really have to take a look at that. And look at my formula for 12-month rolling average. I'm trying to think through that right here on the spot, but that's not really that helpful. Basically, I think the rolling 12-month average is actually still positive despite the drop in February, because we're talking about a whole year of data here. So yeah, I guess unless February. Because we're not looking at the effect from January anymore. So if February was also really bad last year, it's kind of hard. But yeah, despite this, we're still clinging on to a positive 12-month rolling average. But obviously, March is going to be even way worse. I mean, it's not even a question in my mind. To me, the question is how bad is it going to look? I mean. Now I know the transit operators, the unions are, a lot of them probably vouching to stay open. I actually haven't looked at the news and seen, how many transit agencies are closed and not operating. It's probably not a good idea to be operating them. There were a lot of transit agencies that I think I was looking at were still operating when I thought, this is a horrible idea to even keep them operating. But, it's so politically contentious, because it's like, if we shut down the public transit, then people can't even get around, and people rely on that to get to jobs that are essential and to get to their food and stuff. So it's really tough. If you leave it open, you're encouraging the spread of the disease, because public transit's a really bad place for people to go in the midst of a pandemic. But, at the same token, you might be preventing poorer, low-income people from being able to get to work and earn a paycheck. So it's like, yeah, a lot of places were telling people not to work anyway. But like, what if you work at somewhere that's essential? You don't have the means to get there because you're a low-income worker, like a grocery store. So now it was really challenging, but I have no doubt in my mind. I mean, no one's going to work, and we know that half of transit ridership is commuting. But besides that, I mean, no one's going anywhere. I mean, no one's using the bus to get around. I don't know how many bus systems are even open anymore, and rail systems. I mean, I have no clue because I haven't looked it up. It's probably something I should have, but you can just imagine. I'm just thinking, is it going to be negative 10%? Is it going to be negative 25%? I mean, I remember in Hurricane Irma, in the state of Florida, it was down like 40% in the month of September, because agencies had to close for like a week, at least 2 weeks, And even after that, a lot of people were cleaning stuff up. They weren't, because you had major evacuations. I mean, people weren't going to work for a week. And then power was out, and people were traveling out of state, then back into state. I mean, public transit just wasn't being operated. But what's it going to be like now across the country? I mean, is it going to be negative 30, negative 40, negative 50%? I mean, is transit ridership going to cut in half or more? I mean, it could go down. It should probably go down to zero. I don't know. But, obviously it's not going to go down to zero. So my question is just how far is it going to drop? So all this positive, all this growth in the trend is going to come to a dead halt. And I'm really glad that we have the numbers from January because it kind of vindicates my prediction, at least personally. Because remember, I didn't tell anyone the prediction besides, maybe some family members, maybe a couple people at work or I have a good buddy that I definitely told. But, I didn't put this out on blast. Like I said, I really wish I would have. But these numbers in January really vindicate me because if we didn't have January, then it would have been really hard for me to argue, yeah, but it would have happened because we're not going to see growth now. I mean, it might be another year or two before we see another positive growth because what we're going to have is we're going to have a few months of horrid numbers as far as transit ridership, which makes total and complete sense. I have no personal problem with the numbers being horrible, but we're going to have a long time of really bad ridership numbers. And then on top of that, we're probably going to have some sort of economic, serious economic repercussion. Some people don't think that's going to happen. We're just going to spring right back out of it. People are all going to go back to work. But I think that the credit crisis is going to come tumbling down. I think there's going to be unemployment for a long, long time. That's really tough to handle. And with all that unemployment, there's going to be, just like there was in 2008 and 2010, the ridership is going to fall even further below what it normally would have been. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a couple of years until we see positive growth again. Fortunately, at that time, it's going to grow pretty quickly, because hopefully you're going to be coming out of a major recession, and we're going to have averages that are still looking at this pandemic where there was no one using it. So. The numbers are going to be shot. There's no question about it. January's already flashing that. I'm sorry, February is already flashing that. And there wasn't even a lot going on in February. I mean, I probably need to look this up. I mean, I probably should be looking this stuff up that I'm talking about. I mean, were things closed down in February? I think California was actually the first one. I'm pulling it up, get its first COVID case. I don't know if you can hear my keyboard clicking. I've got to trust on Wikipedia here. Stay-at-home order March 23rd. 2 deaths there on February 26th were also due to COVID-19. January 21. It was announced. The first case in the U.S. was actually in Washington. Okay, I thought it was in California. I was wrong, according to Wikipedia, and it was on January 21st. So yeah, for sure. And Washington made the first announcement of a death from disease in the U.S. on February 29th. And later was announced that 2 deaths there on February 26th. So yeah, the case was announced in January, and then you probably had strict measures in the Seattle area. I don't know, but you probably had people staying home since then and getting spooked, and and then there was already a death by the end of February. So by then, definitely people were in starting to shut down. So and then word was getting out. So that throughout. The point is, throughout February, yeah, there certainly were people that were starting to stay home, and we're seeing that in the transit numbers. But I guess what we should do is look at some other trends. So what did service look like? Now, this actually shocked me, but like I said, So a lot of agencies don't release their service numbers the same month of the ridership. The ridership's 1 month ahead. So it's showing negative 8.3% from February 19 to February 20. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if it was down, but not down 8.3%. I think that this is just a lag in the data. Now, if we look at 2019, let's go back to 2019. It's still showing January, from January 19 to January 2020, it's down 1.2%. So the 12-month rolling average is plus 1%, but the January one is minus 1.2%. So I have no idea when transit's doing really well, it's starting to catch traction, and people are actually starting to ride it again. Why are agencies around the country cutting it still? I mean, this is... could you imagine what the growth would be? I mean, we saw the 4.4 number. Could you imagine what that would be if agencies were providing service at the same rate in 2020 as 2019? Oh, and by the way, I mentioned winter storms. Maybe the agencies were providing less service because there were a couple days that they were shut down to winter storms, more in 2020 than 2019. Okay, that's plausible, but then why were people still using it more? So, you got to answer these questions. I mean, the demand is there. But also, the question from it going up 4.4% in 2020 versus 2019 ridership, a lot of people might say, well, there was a storm in 2019 or something. There was a snowstorm or a couple fronts that came through that shut things down more. But then I looked at 2018 and it was up like 2.4% over 2018. So, and we already know that 19 was worse than 18. So the base year for 18 is higher. So yeah, it's a consistent thing. I mean, this ridership was really getting ready to catch and spark, despite service cuts. It's pretty incredible. So, and that was January numbers. So, if you combine them together, we're looking at plus. If we're looking at January, because the February numbers might be lagging. If we're looking at January, the boardings per revenue mile, if you combine the ridership and the service, was up 5.6%. I mean, I see a real hook in the boardings per revenue mile. Now, I was always of the opinion that when ridership would start going up, at the very least, it would be going up because vehicle service, revenue mile service was going up. And, there's no way that boardings per revenue mile would start going up, because that implies that there's an actual change in demand amongst the people, and there's like an underlying economic trend, because, if the service grows, then it makes sense for the ridership to grow and following, because you might have expanded the service to a different hour, to later hours, or you might have added a route, and of course you're going to get more ridership if you add a route. But the boardings per revenue miles still might go down despite your increasing ridership, because those routes and those services that you add, late night service and an extra route going out to the middle of nowhere, that's going to give you a few extra riders, but it's going to be less efficient than the rest of your system. So if you're increasing ridership just by adding service, a lot of times your boardings per revenue mile is still going down. So I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that ridership, the ridership trough and going back up would coincide with boardings per revenue mile going up, turning and going back up. In other words, it's going up despite cuts in service. The boarding per revenue mile trend actually looks better than the ridership trend, which, that's incredible to me. I mean, what does that say? That there's something going on. There was, not anymore. There was something going on with people and the way they were behaving and the way they were thinking. I don't know if Uber started raising their rates, or, people, we reached a critical mass in vehicle ownership. People just stopped buying new vehicles. I mean, that was it. But it almost seems like people started losing their vehicles. Maybe employment was growing really fast among low-income workers. It's really hard to make out exactly what the cause is, but boardings per revenue mile, this is the most impressive trend I've seen in a while if you're just looking at January. If you look at February, due to the lag of data, it looks actually even better, but we're not going to focus on that. But the 12-month trend, like I said, is up. Same thing if you look at boardings per revenue hours. Now, I also look at operating speed. I just take the vehicle revenue miles and divide by the vehicle revenue hours. And that actually went up. The 12-month rolling average of the speed, the operating speed for all transit vehicles, went up slightly in February. If you look at February, the average speed in January of 2020 was 15.15 miles per hour. And it jumped to 15.33 miles per hour in February. So just in 1 month, the speed went up. You think, oh, it's only 0.2 miles per hour. But this is an average across the country. I mean, this is a very general trend. So if it were to go up, 0.2 over 15, it's going up a little bit. I don't know the exact percent. I can sit here and do it right now, which in fact I am, because I'm curious. I gotta put it. And of course I did it wrong, so it's gonna slow me down even that much more. Okay, it's a 1.3% growth, but in 1 month for average speed to go up by 1.3%, and that might be because there were fewer people riding in February than in January. Is that true? I don't even know if that's true. But fewer people per... No, we don't really know if there were fewer people per revenue mile. But it could be for all sorts of things. I mean, there could just be less traffic. Maybe it was more winter storms or something. I don't know. I mean, who knows why the speed went up. But, I tend to see speed going up as a good thing because, it just means that it's more competitive. It's that much more competitive, or that much less uncompetitive, against the vehicle, the automobile. When transit's moving faster, it's getting people to where they want to go faster. It's going to help the equation as far as people using it. I mean, I don't think it's good, but I think it's good for ridership. Like I said, I don't want to say if I think that ridership is a good thing or a bad thing in general. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree that it's a good thing, but so speed, it had a little spike in February, and that panned out in the rolling average number. Now, VOMS is the thing that at the very end of 2019, I think in November and December, all the numbers started to trail down. So I don't know if that's, I guess there are cyclical things where in certain months it tends to dip and come back up and dip and come back up, or cycles, because the FTA does their grants where they give out money for agencies to buy new vehicles. So I don't know what the vehicles operating at maximum service going down here really means. The 12-month rolling average actually going down does look a little sketchy. I don't know if there's a data lag or what's going on, but I'll point it out when I go over the mode-specific details here in a second with commuter rail in specific. I mean, there's a real trend there. But let me go into those sub-modes. Yeah, I think I'm there. Yeah, let's go into those sub-modes. I've got bus here, all buses. This is including commuter buses, regular city metro buses, and then also like bus rapid transit. And this includes this loops all the buses together, trolley buses. So we have a negative. We have a basically. Okay, in February, we're down 10-11% in ridership. So that's, a lot of your decline in ridership right there is due to bus. I mean, it's interesting because the rail, you'd think it would be impacted a little bit more by the virus. I don't want to be getting on a subway. I mean, I don't want to be getting on a bus. You can be certain I don't want to get on any public transit. But I think a subway is even a little, especially in crowded metro areas, is a little bit sketchier than getting on a city bus kind of in a medium metro area, because a lot of medium metro areas, there's not a lot of people using the bus. I mean, it's not that crowded. But in a subway in Washington, D.C., I don't know, man. But, according to numbers, bus was looking really bad in February. But let's go back to January. January 20 over 19, bus overall is like 0.0%. It's like there's no change. Over the year, the month to month, or month. I keep saying it. I say current month. Change from last year. 12-month rolling average is down. Bus is down 1%. So despite this growth, I mean, all this growth is happening in rail basically, and there's this big disparity, and it's been going on for a long time. Bus was going down and rail was still going up. Then rail started to turn down, but bus was still going down a lot. And now bus is still going down, and rail is the only one that's keeping this trend afloat here, and pushing it back upwards. Um, there's really systematic problems in the bus, whatever's going on with bus, and rail is a lot more expensive to operate than bus, I'll tell you that. So the boardings per revenue mile was not looking good for bus coming in, because service was going up, but ridership wasn't. So and 12-month rolling average, ridership was down for bus. But rail overall, the 2020 January from 2019 January was up 9.5%. So bus was zero. It was like no change. We're talking January now, because February is just, a special circumstance. But January, bus was zero, rail was 9.5%. So now we know where the 4.4 comes from. The 12-month rolling average for rail is up 2.4%. So, since April of 2019, I started to realize that this is the big change. You look at the ridership in rail, and April 2019 is really where the curve starts shooting up. And really, and then in October, it even pivots even steeper. So VRM and VRH, that's a vehicle service, is up as well. But BPRM has been on the rise. It has been going up. Ridership has been going up faster than service since October 2019 for rail. Rail is looking very good. Now, ferry, I had been pointing out, ferry was looking like a Cinderella story for a while there in 2018 when everything else was looking bleak. But it seemed to have come to an end. Since June 2019, all the numbers are down. Service, ridership, BPRM. But BPRM is kind of flat. I mean, it's like they just, I don't know what happened to the service. I mean, I guess agencies pulled back or whatever. Ferry is very awkward. It goes with seasons. Ferries don't operate in winter, and so you get some use in the summer, but there's not that many around the country. But you should have seen the ridership curve for ferry was up a ton in like 2018 and 2019. It was looking really promising. But the BPRM rose slightly in January of 2020, the rolling average BPRM. Commuter rail, it looked pretty good, plus 4.6%, 12-month rolling average plus 1.7. Now, that's not as good as rail in general, which means your heavy rail is doing even better. But that is where we saw the VOMs, the vehicles operating at maximum service, have a big cut. Ever since July, I look back, July 2018, ever since then, there was like a steady decline, like a steep decline in number of vehicles. And I just don't understand what's going on there. But the ridership's still going up. So, I mean, you tell me. The speed is going down, which is kind of stinky for a commuter rail. I mean, commuter rail, you want the speed to be high. But I guess commuter rail is on its own thing, and people are going far distance anyway. A lot of times, the speed changing in one way or another doesn't matter that much. But it's been going down steadily for a long time, but generally in conjunction with ridership going up. So you can say that as ridership goes up, speed goes down because you got to give more time for people to board. Anyway, bus rapid transit. Now, this is a subset of bus. Inside a bus, you have bus rapid transit. And the nice thing about bus rapid transit is it's got some separated guideway, or how should I say this? The point of bus rapid transit is it has its own dedicated lane. So the bus is operating its own lane, and it gets to bypass all the congestion, all the automobile congestion. I don't know if that's completely required for all the people all the agencies who claim they're operating BRT for NTD to accept it, but there has to be, definitely a lot of measures like, fare payment, easy fare payment, really good facilities for passengers, and stop spacing. Definitely, this is one of the big requirements. It's more spread out stop spacing, so it's not like you're stopping every city block. You might be stopping every, I don't know, quarter mile or half mile, maybe not a half mile, but I don't know, instead of a tenth of a mile, you're stopping every quarter mile. The point is to make it a lot more streamlined and to move people a lot faster on BRT. And so that's there's people that are big believers in BRT because they operate like rail in that they're on a so-called dedicated right-of-way. but they're a lot cheaper because you don't have to pay for all the rail. Buses are just cheaper to buy. Capital and operating expenses for the most part, and they can still fit a lot of people. So the ridership current month, that's we're still looking at January 2020 over 2019, plus 0.4%, 12-month rolling average plus 7.1%. What? Wow. Year to date, that's the same as current month. But the service was down in January, so the BPRM was up a lot. It went from 5.23 in December of 19, 12-month rolling average, to 5.87. So the boarding per revenue miles was going up a decent amount. So BRT looking good, commuter rail looking good, rail in general looking good. So everything with a fixed guide with its own dedicated right-of-way is looking great. Bus in general not looking so good, but ever since looking at just the month of February, everything's looking bad. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is geographical regions. Where is transit ridership growing, and where is it looking the best? I'm just gonna slide over here to my slides here. I lumped these together by state, and I developed this little map, that each month I put in the data updates the map. And, that way I can see which states are changing in which directions the best, and it does a really good job. Man, you know what? I really wish I could make this document available, but I don't think I can. It's just such a huge workbook, and I still don't know. I mean, someone needs to confirm. I don't know if well, I don't want to say his name, but if someone wants to check that for me, I mean, I know I don't have a lot of subscribers, and I could probably try to check if it works for me, but because it's from my account, I'd have to log out and see if it works. I just want to make sure someone else that's just watching it can click on the link in my MLB video. I think that was episode 2, and let me know. Comment if you can download or access that that link that I put in the comment section of episode 2 to get that report that I was talking about in that video or in that podcast, because I might be able to do something similar. It might take some effort, but I might be able to add that to the comment section of this one. But it takes so much effort that I just want to make sure it works first. But let's talk about the states, the top states where ridership has been increasing over the last 12 months. And when I say over the last 12 months, I guess I should say this is the last 12 months of ridership data, and we're going through January because, like I said, February is off kilter, and the next few months are going to be bad. In fact, the next episodes are probably going to be pretty short because all I'm going to say is things are looking horrible. But last 12 months from the previous 12 months, that's what we're doing, percent change. The top states that are growing are, and I'll read them in order, and I'll say them out. So Alaska up 5%, Maine up 4.6%, West Virginia up 4.6%, Virginia up 4.3%, Oklahoma up 4.1%, Texas up 3.8%, New York up 3.2%, and Connecticut up 3.2%. And so those are not the only positives; those are just like the biggest ones. But all of those are 3.2% growth and up, which is just great year over year. I mean, that is really good. Some states like Texas, their population growth is going to carry that. But look at Oklahoma. I mean, is it Oklahoma City or Kansas City who's doing the fare free? I got to look that up. I think it's Kansas City. Yeah, it's Kansas City. But is Kansas City in Oklahoma? I don't. Or no, I'm sorry. It's in Missouri. It's on the border of Missouri. So what's going on in Oklahoma? Like Tulsa? Oklahoma City, I guess. Yeah, they're growing. Some small states, they go through these cycles. We'll get to that with the negative ones. But Virginia's going to be impacted. The way this works is, everything's coded by urban area. So Virginia is going to capture all of DC's transit. So whatever DC is doing, Virginia is going to capture that. and so is Maryland, and so is West Virginia to a certain extent, I think. Not sure though. So that's why those West Virginia's up as well as Virginia. But Texas, that's going to get carried by population growth. New York City, that carries a lot of the nation's transit ridership. Like we're talking 35 to 40% of all the transit ridership in the country takes place in New York City metro area. So, them going up by 3.2% is carrying the nation's average. Trust me. Now the worst states are, I'm going to read them in order from worst, and then slightly less worse as I go up, but these are all negative. And I'm going to go over basically the worst, the states with the lowest or the most negative percent change. So North Dakota, negative 28.2%. Mississippi, negative 15.9%. Louisiana, negative 12.7%. Arkansas, 11.2%. Alabama, negative 10.5%. Kansas, negative 8.9%. Tennessee, negative 7.3%. And Arizona, negative 7.0%. Now, what you probably noticed here is that there's a trend with these southern states, Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. Those are, and not just southern, but those Gulf southern. I don't even know how to explain it, but we do see this kind of thing happening sometimes where states in the same kind of region or with similar cultures or similar things happening, demographics, they're going to move a certain way altogether. And right now we can see it with Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. Those states right there are all kind of moving in the same direction. And, it's in this case, sometimes you can say, oh, there was a hurricane that went through. A hurricane season is going to impact all those states. Well, I can't say that for this in this situation. I can't really say what was going on in 2019. Did we have Hurricane Matthew or? But that was in Florida too, but I guess it didn't hit that many. The percentage of people up there. No, that was 2016. Which one was the Michael? Michael is what I'm talking about. Hurricane Michael. But that was 2018. Okay, so that wasn't last year. So yeah, I don't know why all these states are going down, but they're close together. Something that's interesting is that like Oklahoma was really good, but Kansas was not so good. So, and those states are very close in demographics and geographic proximity. But you'll get a state like North Dakota, negative 28.2. I mean, they have a few systems. I mean, they don't have a lot. So one thing that goes bad, they're going to look pretty bad. But it may just be a reporting thing. I mean, they just may have canceled some service and added something new, and things just take some time to. Maine had a cycle like that not too long ago, where they looked really bad, but then the next year they looked great. So now I just want to hit the top urban areas, and just go over the trends quickly. New York City, 12-month rolling average percent change last 12 over previous 12. Is plus 2.1. So when I say TMRA, that's the 12-month rolling average, and then when I say current month, that's like January 20 versus January 2019. So New York City, the TMRA, plus 2.1, current month plus 7.3. Besides that, the fifth largest system is Washington Metro and DC, and they're up 3%. 3.0% in TMRA, and 5.8% current month. Seattle is up current month 2%, 2.0%, but they were down 0.9% TMRA. Those were the only positives in the whole list of top. Is that 10? In the top 10 agencies. I'm sorry, not agencies, but urban areas by ridership. So everyone else was negative. So New York City's really bringing everyone up. New York City and Washington, D.C. Now you've got like San Francisco, Oakland, they're only down 0.3%. Seattle only down 0.9%. So they're not terrible. But you got some places like Boston down 4.4%. Philadelphia down 4.3%. Miami used to be pretty bad, but they're down 3.4%. So those are the 12-month rolling average numbers. So New York City's doing a good job was doing a good job pulling everyone up. We're going to see how things progress coming up. Oh, by the way, the national average for states was, I'm sorry, no, the national average was 0.8 weighted average. So when we're looking at all these states, when we were doing that earlier, and even the urban areas, I mean, you're going to compare those to the 0.8 number, the positive 0.8. So, that's just a look at the top 10 areas. Oh, by the way, the top 10 areas, urban areas, are in order: New York City, then Chicago, then Los Angeles, then San Francisco, Oakland, then Washington, D.C., Boston, Philadelphia, Seattle, Miami, and then Atlanta is number 10. So, that's going to wrap it up for all the numbers I have. I guess just some couple wrap-up comments. Hopefully this wasn't too boring. The main point is, hopefully this was my first introductory podcast as far as transit ridership. I'm going to do this every month, just because I love it so much, and I'm just going to go over the numbers. And hopefully, you can see some state trends. We'll go over some modal trends, and just across the country. Biggest point is we can already see the coronavirus or the COVID situation panning out in the transit ridership numbers, and it's not even a surprise. I mean, I'm actually surprised that it wasn't worse, but I guess February things didn't start getting that serious. March is going to be a massacre as far as transit ridership numbers. But what I'm waiting to see for next month is, did the service also cut? I doubt it. I think a lot of the unions we're gonna try to keep service, and politicians, just trying to do their best to do a balancing act. We're gonna keep the service running even though no one was using it. And therefore, the boardings per revenue mile numbers are going to look atrocious. Well, they're going to look bad. The thing is, ridership's going to get cut horribly. And what you would hope, if you were looking at the boardings per revenue mile trend, is that service also gets cut. So, it doesn't make it look that bad. It just looks like, we had a national crisis, but it doesn't look like the trends changed. But what I'm thinking is going to happen is, agencies and transit authorities are going to keep their service running, and no one's going to use it. It's going to make the actual trend look bad. And everyone knows that that's not the case. Everyone knows the virus is going to hit ridership hard. But I guess looking backwards a month, looking into January at the end of 2019, a few people have commented it now. I'm not the first to report it, but we did have a trough. Okay, when this is all said and done, remember that the United States was coming out of one of the longest decline periods. I mean, the longest since, I think, going back, you'd have to go back to the 90s. The mid-90s, maybe, the early 90s. And I think that decline period even started in the 80s. But yeah, since then, we've had the longest decline period in transit ridership. And like I said, it was due to a lot of factors, but we had finally troughed. We had finally hit the peak. And it says a lot about economics, because the macroeconomic trends, because a lot of people were calling recession and stuff. And a lot of that is because you get to a point where the economy can only grow so much, and people can only afford so many cars. I mean, once everyone who wants a car has a car, your transit ridership is going to level off. Because, yeah, if there were people that wanted cars that didn't have them, and they were riding transit because they just weren't able to afford a car, yeah, the ridership's going to be carried by that person. But the moment that person can afford a car, they're going to go get a car. And if the economy is doing so good that they're able to finally afford a car, they're going to get the car and they're going to stop riding transit. And that's going to push transit rider, that trend had been pushing transit ridership down. But eventually, that person's riding the car for a couple of years, and other people are starting to get cars, and other people are starting to get cars, but eventually everyone who wants a car has a car. And now your transit ridership decline trend is going to start to level out, and our economy is going to get at a point of basically saturation. People, as far as travel trends, I mean, people are going to be living the best life they can live, the most freedom, as far as being able to hop in their car and go wherever they want. But at the same time, transit ridership is linked to employment in general. So the trough ends up happening, and the ridership starts going up Why does the ridership start going up? I mean, I don't know. Maybe there are still a few people that could not afford it, but the jobs were going up so high. There's a lot of factors changing and maneuvering around, and so maybe transit agencies were starting to implement good measures because they had so long to basically do studies and figure out and maybe reroute their systems and become more efficient. And maybe those effects were starting to take place. Maybe all along, the economic trend was pushing things down, but the transit agencies were working really hard to try to mitigate the trend. And eventually, once the economy leveled off as far as vehicle saturation, all those efforts that the transit agencies were doing, started to take root among the people, and people started to use transit. I mean, I don't know what was going on to make this happen. Because it was even more surprising and more January especially. It was just crossing the threshold and moving very slowly in the positive direction towards the end of last year. But January, it just popped. And, I'll tell one anecdotal story, and I know I'm running over on time, but, I live in Florida, and there's a county in my state, St. Lucie County, that's running. It just started running in towards the end of 2017. So for all of 2018 and all of 2019, they were running fare-free service. They had a few routes. They had like 7 routes, bus routes. And they decided, you know what? We're running these routes. People are paying, but we're only recovering, 15% of our operating costs anyway. Let's just cut the cord on fares. Let's just let everyone who wants to ride. And the ridership like tripled in a year. And so I don't know what's going on around the country, but I think there are measures that the agencies are out there. They've been working hard because they've been watching this trend, and eventually it's taken root. And so a lot of people were going to be happy with that, and but here came along the virus, and it's going to shut things down, and it's going to put a huge pause on things like this, things like transit, the normal way of life. Transit's actually going to be a really indicative trend when people look back at what happened in this time period. When we look back at the pandemic of 2020, the COVID, whatever we call it. You can look at the transit ridership trend, and I think, and I don't know this because we don't have March yet. I mean, we just saw the very, very beginning, the negative 1.7%. Well, that's nothing compared to what I think we're going to have. So I'm predicting that this trend is going to look so bad, or not. I don't want to say bad, but it's going to look so out of the ordinary that you're going to be able to look back on it years from now and say, wow, that's the effect that it had. That's the effect that the pandemic had on society. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. And hopefully this was an educational discussion. I know a lot of people aren't that excited about it, but I don't know if you know someone who's into demographics, travel trends, public transit, urban planning. I don't know. Forward it along to them, and please, subscribe if you're interested in my topics. Go look at some of my other videos. I've done a biblical discussion if you like the Bible. I've done Major League Baseball 2019 data review. I've done, the stimulus spending bill and some of the impacts of that as well. So we're on 4 episodes now. I think we're going to start to get into a groove. Eventually, I'm going to be able to start grouping these into playlists. So yeah, please subscribe and like the video. Any view and every subscription and every subscriber, every view, and every like count a lot at this point. So, check me out. Click the subscribe button and the like button, and also check out there's a channel that I've linked to this channel, or I put it in my favorite channels, or what, I don't know what it's called. I put it in my channels, and so you can click on it. It's SEP podcast, Short End of the Pick. It's a podcast that me and my buddy did together. That we do together, but we've had to take a little bit of a break. But check that out as well. And you guys take care and stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.